They say family is forever. That's a lie. My own son told me I wasn't family anymore, and his wife made sure I believed it. The morning it all began, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you notice your own breathing. I woke before the sun had risen, the way I always did. My bones ached from years of work, but my hands still knew what to do. I rolled up my sleeves, tied the old apron around my waist, and pressed my palms into the soft dough. The smell of yeast filled the air as I kneaded slowly, rhythmically, as though the motion itself might keep me steady. I hummed while I worked. An old tune my mother once sang to me back in Santa Fe. For a moment, the sound of my voice mixed with the beating of the dough, and I almost felt peace. My mind drifted to the past, to Adrian, my son, when he was just a boy. I remembered his little hands grabbing at the edges of the counter, watching me knead bread just like this. He would giggle when I tapped the dough twice and tell me it was magic. Back then, everything I made with my hands was magic to him, but children grow, and sometimes they grow away from you. When the bread was ready, I placed it carefully in the oven. The crust browned, the kitchen warming with the familiar scent that once meant love and safety. My grandson Lucas was still asleep upstairs, but I wanted him to wake to the smell of his grandmother's bread. He had coughed all night, the kind of soft, dry cough that twists a grandmother's heart. I thought if I could get him to eat something warm and gentle this morning, maybe it would comfort him. That was my only thought. Just comfort. Just love. But love doesn't always translate the way you think it will. I pulled the bread from the oven and placed it on a cutting board. My hands shook slightly as I sliced it, not from weakness, but from the small tremor age had gifted me over the years. I set the slices on a plate, the steam rising in soft curls. That's when Lucas came running into the kitchen, his small feet pattering across the hardwood floor. His face lit up. Abua, he said. The word I held closest to my heart. Is that for me? I smiled. Of course, cariño. Just for you. But before he could reach for the bread, she entered. Claudia, my son's wife. Her footsteps were sharp, echoing against the marble floor like warning bells. She swept into the kitchen wearing her silk robe, hair perfectly tied back even this early in the morning. Her eyes landed on the plate of bread and her expression hardened instantly. What is this? She demanded. It's just bread, I said softly. For Lucas. He was coughing. Before I could finish, she strode forward, snatched the plate from the counter, and with one violent motion threw it down to the floor. The sound was louder than I expected. The crust cracked, pieces scattering across the tiles. The smell of warmth and love gone, replaced with the sharp scent of burned humiliation. Claudia's eyes burned into me. This is my kitchen. You don't get to poison my family again, I froze. Her words hit harder than the bread hitting the ground. Poison. That's what she saw in me. Not a mother. Not a grandmother. A poison. I turned my head and saw Lucas. His eyes were wide, his little hands clutching the counter. He stared at the bread on the floor, then at me, then at his mother. He didn't understand. How could he? And then I saw Adrian. My son, my blood. He was leaning against the refrigerator, arms crossed over his chest, jaw clenched. He didn't move. He didn't step forward. He didn't defend me, Adrian, I whispered. My voice trembled, but I tried to steady it. I only made it for Lucas. He was coughing all night. But Claudia cut me off, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. Are you stealing again, Isabella? The word made my breath catch. Stealing. That old wound. My lips parted, but no words came. I remembered in that instant the police station. The cold cuffs around my wrists. The loaf of bread I took when I was just a young mother trying to feed Adrian. That memory had followed me my whole life. And now here it was again, thrown in my face by the woman who married my son. Claudia smirked, folding her arms. Once a thief, always a thief. Adrian exhaled slowly, shaking his head. This is my house. My kitchen. Don't touch anything. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he'd been waiting to say those words. My hands hung at my sides, sticky with crumbs and shame. I looked down at the broken bread at my feet, then up at Lucas. His small face was twisted with confusion, his eyes darting between the three of us. And then, softly, he tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, is Grandma not family? The question shattered me. Claudia crouched down, smoothed his hair, and spoke sweetly. No, sweetie. She's just staying here. Like a guest. A guest? Lucas repeated, tilting his head. Adrian's voice came then, even colder than hers. You are not family anymore, Mom. You are just someone staying in a room. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I knew this moment had been coming for years. The bread at my feet felt heavier than stone. The silence in the room pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. And yet in that silence, I realized something. They weren't just angry at me. They were ashamed of me. I bent down slowly, brushed crumbs from my sweater, and without another word, I turned away. I walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. In the small room Claudia liked to call the guest room, I closed the door behind me. On the nightstand sat the little clay gift Lucas had made me in preschool, a crooked heart with his face glued inside, and the words, "I love Grandma," scrawled in bright purple crayon across the top. I cradled it in my hands. My chest tightened. Just 3 years ago, he had written those words. And now he was being told I was nothing more than a guest. Downstairs, I heard the sound of laughter, glasses clinking, silverware scraping plates. The sound of a family. But not mine. Not anymore. I sat in silence, but my mind wasn't quiet. It replayed everything. Every small erasure. Every time I was told I didn't belong. Every time I was moved further and further to the edge of my own life. I turned my head toward the window. The winter sun was fading over the fence outside, painting the world in muted gold. For a moment, I remembered a different sun. The day I first brought Adrian home from the hospital. He was wrapped in a blue blanket, his eyes wide open. He needed me once. Now he needed me gone. The laughter from below grew louder. I imagined the table. Candles lit, wine poured, Claudia smiling. My chair, empty, and in my mind I saw young Adrian again. Sitting at that same table, legs swinging beneath the chair, waiting for me to serve him rice and beans after school. Back then, I was the center of his world. Now, I was a shadow in the corner of his house, and I finally understood. Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes it comes when your son looks you in the eyes and tells you that you are no longer family. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. I sat there holding that little clay heart, listening to the sounds of a family I had built, a family that had erased me. And deep inside, something broke. But something else began to stir. They called me a guest in my own son's house. But they never knew the cost of the home they lived in. They never knew what it took for me to put a roof over their heads. So let me tell you. Before the marble floors and polished dining tables, there was a girl stepping off a bus in Santa Fe. A girl holding nothing but a fraying suitcase and a belly swollen with life. That girl was me. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The air smelled of dust and gasoline. People rushed around me, carrying bags, greeting family, catching taxis. I stood alone on the sidewalk, the desert sun beating down on me. My clothes clung to my skin, my hair stuck to my forehead, and my stomach twisted with both hunger and fear. I pressed one hand against my belly. Inside, my son kicked. That tiny push reminded me why I was here. I wasn't running from something, I was running to something. A future for him. A chance at dignity, even if I had none left for myself. But survival doesn't wait for dreams. The first weeks in Santa Fe were the hardest. I knocked on doors. I begged for work. Most turned me away, their eyes sliding down to my swollen stomach before they closed the door. But a few gave me a chance. I scrubbed floors until my fingers cracked. I washed clothes until the skin on my hands peeled. I cleaned houses that smelled of cinnamon and wealth, houses where women with soft voices called out for things I could never afford. At night, I slept on a borrowed mattress on the floor of a tiny room. I curled on my side with one hand around my belly, whispering promises into the darkness. It's okay, Adrian. Mama will take care of you. But life doesn't care about promises. I'll never forget the winter when Adrian was barely a year old. The air was sharp, slicing through my thin coat as I carried him through the streets. His cheeks burned red from the cold, and his small body shivered against mine. He coughed, weak, pitiful, the kind of cough that haunts a mother. That morning, I had $3 left. $3 and no milk, no food. I walked past a bakery, the smell of fresh bread twisting like a knife in my gut. Adrian whimpered, his lips pale, his eyes tired. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I waited until no one was looking. My hands shook as I reached for a loaf cooling by the window. I grabbed it, stuffed it into my coat, and ran. My heart thundered in my chest as I ducked into an alley, clutching my baby, clutching the bread. But I wasn't fast enough. The heavy hand of the baker landed on my shoulder. He shouted, called me a thief. Soon the police arrived. They dragged me through the streets with Adrian crying in my arms. People stared. Some shook their heads. Others whispered. At the station, they took the bread from me, cold and hard now, useless. I sat in a corner cell, my baby pressed against me, and I whispered into his ear, "It's okay. Mama will fix it." My voice cracked, but I kept whispering until he stopped crying. That word, thief, never left me. Even years later, Claudia would spit it in my face, as if my entire life could be summed up by that one desperate moment. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When Adrian was 4, I scraped together enough savings to rent a small space on the corner of a busy street. It was nothing but cracked walls and a flickering light bulb, but to me, it was hope. I called it Bella's Corner Shop. At first, the shelves were half empty. A few sacks of rice, some beans, a handful of spices. But every day I worked. I swept, I stocked, I sold. People came in, curious, then returned because I treated them like family. The little shop became more than a business. It became a place where the lonely found company, where tired workers bought food and left with a smile. Adrian grew up there. After school, he'd sit on a stool behind the counter, swinging his legs while I taught him how to count change. He'd draw on scraps of receipt paper, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. Sometimes he'd complain, "Mama, why do I always have to help?" And I'd laugh, ruffling his hair, telling him, "Because one day, you'll understand." Years passed. The shop grew. But the world doesn't stay still. Competition came, bigger stores with brighter lights. My little corner shop couldn't keep up. The day I closed its doors for the last time, my hands shook as I turned the key. But I wasn't finished. With the money I'd saved and with the stubborn fire in my chest, I rebuilt the shop into a home. A real home? On Cedar Grove Lane. For the first time in my life, I owned something that could not be taken from me. The walls smelled of paint and new beginnings. The floors creaked, but they creaked with pride. I ran my hands along the doorway and whispered, "This is ours. Adrian, ours." I thought he would be proud, but children don't always see the same story their parents do. When Adrian was a teenager, the shame began. He didn't like when his friends came over and saw me behind the counter, apron stained, hair pulled back, hands rough from work. "You embarrass me," he snapped once, his voice sharp. "Can't you just be normal like other moms?" The words stung, but I told myself it was just the anger of youth. I told myself he would grow out of it. That one day, he would understand why I did it all. But he never did. Years later, I sat in the very home I had built, watching him on television. Adrian was giving an interview, his suit crisp, his smile polished. "I built myself from scratch," he told the reporter. "No help, no handouts. Everything I am, I created on my own." The audience clapped. The reporter smiled. And I sat there, my heart heavy, realizing that in his story, I had been erased. The nights scrubbing floors. The bread stolen to keep him alive. The shop where he learned to count. The home rebuilt from nothing. All of it, erased with a single sentence. And that was the cruelest betrayal of all. They didn't throw me out of the house. No, that would have been kinder. Instead, they erased me piece by piece until I was nothing more than a shadow walking the same halls I had built. It began with the small things. One morning, I came downstairs and noticed the rosary beads that hung above the doorway were gone. They had been there for years, beads worn smooth by my fingers, a reminder of my mother and the faith that carried me through dark times. In their place hung a sleek, abstract painting, nothing but sharp black lines on a white canvas. Cold, empty. The next day, the garlic braid that once swung gently in the kitchen was missing too. I found it later in the trash outside, its cloves still fresh. Instead, there were shiny glass jars filled with imported spices, lined up neatly for display but never used. And then it was my rocking chair. The one I had brought from the old shop, the one where I had sat night after night, rocking Adrian to sleep when he was a baby. Claudia had moved it into the garage. In its place was a sterile gray armchair that no one ever sat in. I asked her once softly, "Where is my chair?" She didn't even look at me. It didn't fit the aesthetic. Her voice was like a blade, slicing away the little pieces of me. But she wasn't finished. One morning, a printed booklet appeared on the counter. The title read, Family Communication Guidelines. The pages were crisp, the words typed neatly as though this was some corporate office rather than a home. I sat at the table and turned the pages slowly. No Spanish in the house, no religious talk, no immigrant stories, no calling me Abua. I stared at the words until they blurred. Each sentence was another nail sealing me into silence. When Adrian walked in, I held up the paper. Adrian, what is this? He adjusted his tie, glanced at it, and shrugged. It's just to keep the peace, Mom. The peace. That was their word for it. Peace meant silence. Peace meant pretending I didn't exist. From then on, I was no longer invited to meals. Claudia told me it was easier that way, less conflict. So I ate alone in the laundry room. I sat on a small folding chair, my plate balanced on my knees, the hum of the washer filling the silence. Through the thin walls, I could hear the sounds of dinner, forks scraping against plates, laughter bubbling, glasses clinking. Sometimes I heard Lucas's little voice asking questions. Sometimes I heard Claudia's voice sweet and false, telling him stories that erased me. And I sat there in the laundry room chewing in silence, the smell of fabric softener mixing with the taste of my food. It wasn't long before the guests came. Important people, according to Claudia. Politicians, business partners, friends from her charity events. The dining room filled with laughter and wine, the air thick with perfume and money. Once I stepped into the kitchen to get a glass of water. One of the guests caught sight of me and asked, "Oh, who's that?" Claudia didn't miss a beat. She smiled, tilted her head, and said lightly, "Oh, she just lives here." She didn't say my name. She didn't say my husband's mother or Lucas's grandmother. Just, she lives here, as if I were a tenant. As if I were a stray dog allowed to stay indoors for the winter. The words struck harder than any slap could have, but the worst came on Christmas. I woke early that morning, as I always did, and decided to cook caldo de pollo, chicken soup. It was Lucas's favorite. The dish he once told me smelled like home. I chopped onions, carrots, cilantro, the steam rising and filling the kitchen with warmth. For a few hours, I felt like myself again. When Lucas wandered into the kitchen and saw the pot simmering, his face lit up. "Abua," he exclaimed. "You made it. It smells like home." I smiled, my heart swelling. For a moment, I believed love could survive here. But then Claudia appeared. She looked at the pot, her face twisting in disgust. "What is this?" She demanded. "Caldo," I said softly. "For Lucas, it's his favorite." She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the pot with a towel, marched to the sink, and poured it out. The broth splashed, the scent of cilantro and chicken filling the air before it disappeared down the drain. "This is peasant food," she snapped. "Not appropriate for our guests." I stood frozen, the ladle still in my hand. My eyes burned, but no tears came. Lucas's lip trembled, his little fists clenched. "But I like it," he whispered. Claudia silenced him with a look. Adrian, standing nearby in his pressed shirt and cufflinks, adjusted his sleeves and looked away. He didn't say a word. That night, while the party went on downstairs, I tried to join them. I put on a simple dress, combed my hair, and walked to the staircase. But when I tried to open the door, it was locked from the other side. I stood there in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wood. From below, music and laughter drifted up. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. The sound of joy filled the house, except for the place where I stood. I slid down against the door and sat quietly in the dark, the cold wood against my back. I closed my eyes and imagined the smell of caldo still in the air, but it was gone. All that remained was the faint echo of music, mocking me. Later that night, when the party ended and the house grew quiet again, I stepped into the hallway. A photographer was packing up his camera equipment. He looked at me, surprised. "Oh," he said softly. "I didn't know you lived here." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain but shows truth. "Neither do they," I whispered. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. They thought they had erased me. They thought I was nothing but a shadow in their perfect house. But shadows can hide secrets. And one night I decided to uncover mine. It was late. The house was quiet. The kind of silence that comes only after too much laughter and too much wine. I slipped out of my small room, careful not to wake anyone. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, wrapping my shawl tighter around my shoulders. I walked across the yard, my slippers sinking into the damp grass. The moonlight painted the garden silver. At the edge of the property stood the shed. Old, forgotten, its wooden panels warped from years of rain and heat. The door creaked when I touched it, as though it hadn't been opened in years. My heart pounded, but I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Cobwebs clung to the corners, the smell of rust and mildew stinging my nose. I stepped carefully, my eyes scanning the piles of boxes, broken tools, and forgotten furniture. And then I saw it. In the far corner, under a heap of old blankets and warped boards, something caught the light. I bent down, my knees aching, and pulled the blankets away. Beneath them was a metal box, scratched and dented. On the lid, etched faintly but unmistakably, was my name, Isabella. My hands trembled as I touched the letters. For a moment I just stared, my chest tightening. Someone had hidden this from me. Someone wanted me to forget. But they had been careless enough to leave my name behind. I dragged the box into the center of the shed. My fingers fumbled with the rusty lock until it snapped open with a sharp click. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside, the truth waited for me. The first thing I saw was a stack of papers, old bank slips, faded with time, but clear enough to read. Each one showed the money I had given Adrian over the years. The loans I had signed. The payments I had made to keep him afloat when he was starting his business. I had saved every receipt, every slip, every number. Proof that I had never stopped giving, never stopped sacrificing. Next, I found the deed. The house deed. My name written clearly across it. My house, my home. The one thing I had built after years of scrubbing floors and stealing bread to survive. All this time, they had pretended it was Adrian's. All this time, they had acted as though I was intruding. But the truth was simple. The house was mine, and then at the bottom of the box, I found the small recorder. My hand froze. I hadn't seen it in years. My late husband had used it once to record grocery lists and family notes. But when I pressed play, it wasn't his voice that came out, it was Claudia's. "She lowers the house's energy," she said, her voice sharp, mocking. "Every time she's in the room, I feel drained. We need to push her further out." I pressed play again. Adrian's voice followed, cold, detached. "She doesn't even remember she owns it. As far as anyone knows, this place is mine now." The words pierced me. Not just the betrayal, but the cruelty in the tone. Not only had they erased me, they had laughed while doing it. I sat there in the dusty shed, the recorder pressed to my chest, my body shaking. But it wasn't from sadness anymore. It was something stronger. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. I looked at the papers, the deed, the proof. For the first time in years, I had something they couldn't dismiss. The evidence of who I was. The evidence of what I had built. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night, I sat at my desk in the guest room. I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. My hands trembled, but my words were steady. I wrote to Victor Alvarez. Victor wasn't just a lawyer. He was a boy I had once helped. Years ago, when his mother was sick, I had given them food from my shop. I had seen the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger I once knew. And now he was a man with power. A man who remembered where he came from. The pen scratched across the paper as I wrote. "Victor, I don't ask for favors. But this is not about kindness. This is about justice. They are trying to erase me, to steal from me what I built with my own hands. I need your help. Not as a lawyer alone, but as someone who once knew what it meant to be forgotten." I signed it simply. Isabella Rivera. For years, I had signed documents as nothing more than mom, grandma, guest. But this time, I used my full name. My real name. A name that could not be erased. I sealed the letter with shaking hands, kissed it, and placed it by the door. The next morning, as the sun rose over the house that was mine, I heard the phone ring. I answered, my breath caught in my throat. "Isabella," the voice said warmly. "It's Victor." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, tears stung my eyes. "You don't know how happy I was to get your letter," he continued. "You're the reason I believe people could be good in this world. And now it's my turn to fight for you." "Victor," I whispered. "I don't want pity," His voice grew firm. This isn't pity. And it isn't a favor. This is justice. And Isabella, you deserve justice. For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. Hope. Real, burning hope. I looked out the window at the house that had tried to erase me. My hands tightened around the phone, my heart steady for the first time in a long time. They thought they could bury me. But they forgot. I keep records. I keep memories. And I keep fighting. The truth was out now. And truth, once found, cannot be silenced. Hope is a dangerous thing to give a woman who has been silenced for too long. And Victor Alvarez had given me hope. When I met him in his office, I carried the metal box with me. My hands trembled as I placed it on his desk, but my voice was steady. These are my records, I told him. Every dollar, every receipt, the deed. The proof, Victor nodded, his eyes sharp as he opened the box. He pulled out the papers, studied them one by one, and then leaned back in his chair. Adrian created a company, Victor said slowly. Rivera Properties LLC. He used it to refinance this house illegally. He tried to remove your name, but he couldn't erase the fact that you are the legal owner. I felt my stomach twist. So he stole it? Victor's jaw tightened. He tried, but he made mistakes. And those mistakes will cost him everything. He tapped one of the slips. This is elder abuse, Isabella. Financial manipulation. The law doesn't look kindly on sons who rob their own mothers. The contract is fragile. One push and it all falls apart. For the first time in years, I let out a laugh. It was quiet, bitter, but real. So all his power was built on sand? Victor smiled faintly. Exactly. That night we began. Victor drafted the complaints. One to the bank, one to the Elder Protection Office. My name appeared on every line, bold and unshakable. He slid the documents toward me, his pen resting at the top page. Isabella, he said, this is the moment. Are you ready to fight? My hand shook as I picked up the pen. For a second, I thought of the bread Claudia had thrown to the floor. I thought of Lucas's little voice asking if I was still family. I thought of Adrian, crossing his arms, calling me a guest. And then I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Not trembling, not weak, but steady. When I finished, Victor took the documents, stacked them neatly, and said, "It begins." I thought that would be the end of it. File the papers, wait for results. But fate had other plans. 2 days later, the phone rang. I answered, expecting Victor. Instead, it was a woman's voice. Bright, confident, curious. Mrs. Rivera? This is Sofia Ramirez. I'm a journalist, I stiffened. Why are you calling me? I heard about your case, she said. Victor showed me the documents. And I think your story isn't just about a house. It's about dignity. It's about how families treat the people who built them. Her words struck something deep in me. Dignity. That was the thing they had taken. Not just my chair, my food, my name, but my dignity. I swallowed. And what do you want to do with my story? I want to tell it, Sophia said simply. I want people to see the truth. Because you're not alone, Isabella. There are thousands of women like you. And maybe if they hear your voice, they'll find their own. For a long time, I was silent. My whole life, I had been taught not to speak. To stay small. To be grateful, but now I had nothing left to lose. Tell it, I whispered. Tell everything? Sophia's voice warmed. I promise, your voice will not be silenced. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my small room, staring at the clay heart Lucas had made me years ago. For the first time, I felt its words were true again. I love Grandma. The next day, Victor invited me back to his office. The walls were lined with books, the air heavy with seriousness. He placed a new folder in front of me. On the cover, written in bold black ink, were the words, Case Isabella. Truth. I stared at it, my throat tight. My fingers brushed the letters slowly, as if touching them might make it real. For so long, I had been nothing but the guest, the shadow, the embarrassment. And now here was my name, my truth, written where no one could erase it. Finally, I whispered, finally. Victor nodded. Yes, finally. Now it's their turn to face what they've done. And in that moment, I knew. The fight was no longer just for me. It was for every woman who had been pushed into silence. For every mother erased from her own story. For every grandmother told she was nothing but a guest. Justice was coming, and this time, they would hear my name. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens or judges. Sometimes it comes in plain envelopes, slid quietly through the mail slot, changing everything. The morning they arrived, I was in the kitchen pouring myself tea. The kettle whistled, steam rising into the still air. Then came the sound, a faint shuffle at the door, 2 soft thuds on the floor, 2 envelopes. I picked them up. One was heavy, thick with official papers. The other was thinner, but the handwriting on the front was sharp, printed, cold. Both bore the seal of the bank. My hands trembled as I opened the first. My eyes scanned the page, the words blurring for a moment before coming into focus. Confirmation of full ownership. My name. My house, legally mine. No more questions. No more lies. I pressed the paper to my chest, my heart pounding. After years of silence, after years of being erased, the truth was now written where no one could deny it. The second envelope belonged to Adrian. I placed it on the table. I didn't even need to open it. I already knew. He came into the kitchen minutes later, Claudia trailing behind him. His hair was messy, his face pale from a sleepless night. Claudia wore her silk robe, but her eyes were sharp, desperate. "What's this?" Adrian muttered, ripping open the envelope. He scanned the words, his lips moving, his hands shaking, credit suspended. Contract voided. Assets under review. The color drained from his face. He sank into the chair, staring at the paper as though it had burned him. Claudia snatched it from his hands, read it quickly, and then screamed. The sound was sharp, shattering, echoing through the kitchen. She grabbed a dish from the counter and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 100 pieces, fragments scattering across the floor. "This can't be happening," she cried. "Do you understand what this means?" "Everything is gone." Adrian just sat there frozen, his eyes empty. The man who once told the world he built himself from scratch now sat broken, staring at the truth of what he had stolen. And I stood silently in the doorway, my cup of tea in hand, watching, but the reckoning was only beginning. That same afternoon, Sofia Ramirez's article went live. The headline burned across every screen. "Mother locked away on Christmas reclaims her home." The story spread like fire. Social media exploded with outrage. Thousands shared it, thousands more commented. People called Adrian heartless, called Claudia cruel. Sponsors began pulling out from Adrian's company, each one issuing polite but firm statements. Our values do not align with his actions. We cannot support a man who erases his own mother. His empire crumbled in real time. Every notification another blow. I watched from the quiet of my room. Not with glee, not with vengeance, but with the calm that comes when truth finally breathes after being buried for too long. And then came the moment that made me realize how fragile his empire truly was. Adrian sat at the counter, his phone in hand. He tapped his Tesla app, trying to start his car. His brow furrowed. He tapped again, harder this time. His lips moved, whispering curses. Finally, the app flashed across the screen. Vehicle access suspended. He froze. His face twisted red with anger. He slammed the phone down, the crack of glass loud in the quiet room. The man who once flaunted his wealth, his cars, his power, now couldn't even start his own vehicle. That night, the storm came. Rain poured from the sky, pounding against the windows, soaking the earth. I sat by the window, the clay heart in my hand, listening to the thunder roll. And then I heard it. A knock at the door. Weak at first, then harder. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. Adrian, my son, kneeling in the pouring rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes soaked through. His hands pressed together, his eyes wild with desperation. "Mom!" he cried. "Please, please, I'm sorry. We were just building a better life. That's all I wanted." "A better life?" His words cut through the storm, but they didn't reach me. Not the way he hoped. Because I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for what he had lost. Behind him, Claudia stood under an umbrella, her mascara running, her face twisted with rage and fear. She didn't speak. She just stared at me with eyes that still saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I stepped forward, the rain soaking the edge of my shawl. I looked down at my son, my boy, the baby I once rocked in that old chair, the boy I once stole bread for, the man who now knelt before me like a stranger. My heart ached. But it did not break. Not this time. I raised a man, I said softly, my voice steady against the storm. Not this, his lips parted, trembling. Mom, but I didn't let him finish. I closed the door. The sound was final. Not cruel, not angry, but final. The storm raged outside, but inside the house there was peace. For the first time in years, I sat in my chair, the clay heart on my lap, and I felt no fear. No shame, no doubt justice had been delivered. Reckoning had arrived, and for the first time I knew, this house was mine. Reckoning had passed. The storm had ended. But justice isn't just about taking something back. It's about rebuilding something new. It was Lucas who reminded me of that. One evening, not long after Adrian's downfall, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, there he was, my grandson. His cheeks were wet with tears, his small body trembling as though the whole world weighed on his shoulders. Abua, he whispered, his voice breaking. I don't want to forget you. I knelt down, pulling him close, his little arms wrapped around my neck, his tears soaking into my shoulder. I won't let them make me forget, he cried. Can I always call you Abua? My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I kissed the top of his head, breathing in the smell of rain and childhood. Always, I whispered. You will always call me Abua, and I will always be your Abua. That night, for the first time in a long time, my kitchen was filled with warmth again. I cooked caldo de pollo, not for a party, not for guests who looked down on me, but just for us. The scent of cilantro and chicken filled the air, steam rising like comfort itself. Lucas sat at the table swinging his legs, his eyes wide with joy. Smells like home, he said softly. I ladled the caldo into bowls, set them on the table, and we ate together quietly. No judgment. No cold stares. Just a grandmother and her grandson, sharing a meal that had always meant love. In that simple moment, I realized something. This house didn't need to be a place of pain anymore. It could become something more, something bigger than me. A week later, I made my decision. I walked into Victor's office with the deed in hand. He looked at me curiously, raising an eyebrow. What now, Isabella? I smiled faintly. I want to give this house away. He blinked. Give it away? Yes, I said firmly. Not to Adrian. Not to Claudia. Not to anyone who will erase me again. I want it to be a home for those who have been erased by their families. A place for the forgotten, and so I donated my home to a nonprofit. They called it Haven for Lost Voices. The renovations began almost immediately. The sterile decorations Claudia had forced in were stripped away. The walls were repainted with warm colors, soft yellows, rich earth tones, shades that breathed life instead of suffocating it. The cold marble table was replaced with a long wooden one, wide enough for everyone to sit together. A greenhouse was built in the backyard, sunlight pouring through the glass, rows of herbs and flowers sprouting like hope itself. A library was added too, shelves filled with donated books, each one carrying stories for those who had none left to tell. For the first time, the house felt alive. Not like a prison, not like a cage, but a sanctuary. The day the first resident arrived, I stood by the doorway, my shawl wrapped around me. Her name was June, an elderly woman with soft gray hair and tired eyes. She had been abandoned by her daughter, left in a nursing home with nothing but a suitcase. When she stepped through the doorway, she looked around uncertainly. Is it really home? She asked, her voice trembling. I took her hand gently and smiled. Yes, June, it's really home. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw myself in her. Forgotten, pushed aside, erased, but no longer. Soon more residents came, each with a story of loss, each carrying wounds invisible to the eye. And with each arrival, the house grew warmer, filled with laughter, with cooking smells, with the sound of chairs scraping as people gathered around the table. One morning, I decided to hold a class in the new kitchen, a bread baking class. I showed the residents how to knead the dough, pressing gently, folding, pressing again. Their hands shook at first, some too old, some too tired, but I guided them, and then I tapped the dough twice with my knuckles. Why do you do that? June asked, tilting her head. I smiled. To let it know it's loved. The room grew quiet. Some smiled. Some cried silently. But every one of them pressed their hands into the dough with new care, new gentleness. Lucas loved those mornings most of all. He would run in, his cheeks flushed, flour dusting his hair. Once he spilled a jar of cinnamon across the counter, covering everything in a sweet, spicy cloud. "Lucas!" I scolded, trying not to laugh. He giggled, brushing cinnamon off his nose. "That's your Abwa power," he said proudly. And I laughed. A laugh so deep it shook me, a laugh I thought I had lost forever. Because he was right. My power wasn't silence. My power wasn't being erased. My power was love. And for the first time I realized love was stronger than their shame. Stronger than their erasure. Stronger than betrayal. This wasn't just my house anymore. It was a haven, a place where the lost found their voices again. A place where dignity was restored. One meal, one story, one loaf of bread at a time. They said I was a guest. They tried to erase me. But here I was, standing in the very house they once tried to take, surrounded not by silence, but by family. A new kind of family. It began at the dining table. A long wooden table wide enough for everyone to gather. I watched as June and the other elders who had joined us filled the seats. Some had shaky hands, some needed help lowering themselves into the chairs, but each one carried a smile. We passed bowls of caldo, plates of warm bread, dishes seasoned with love. The air filled with laughter, not the laughter of mockery, but the laughter of belonging. For the first time in years, I didn't eat alone. And as I looked around, I realized family wasn't just blood. Family was whoever sat at your table and called you theirs. Lucas was at the center of it all, darting between chairs, refilling water glasses, making jokes that had everyone smiling. His energy was like sunlight spreading warmth wherever it touched. One afternoon, I found him in the library with June. She sat in a big chair, her eyes squinting at the pages of a book she could no longer see clearly. Lucas sat beside her, reading aloud. His voice was steady, his words filled with care. June's smile grew wider with every sentence. "You read like an angel," she whispered. Lucas beamed, his little chest puffing out. I stood at the doorway, my hand pressed to my heart, and I thought, yes, this is what legacy looks like. Not money, not power, but love passed down like a story, retold by the next generation. The garden became our sanctuary. The greenhouse gleamed in the sunlight, rows of herbs and flowers stretching toward the sky. Lucas and I walked hand in hand through the soil, our fingers brushing through rosemary, mint, cilantro. "Plant this one deep," I told him, guiding his small hands as he pressed a basil sprout into the earth. "The deeper the roots, the stronger it will stand." He nodded, dirt smudging his cheek. "Like you, Abua," I smiled, my throat tight. Out of the mouths of children comes truth we adults forget. The library grew too. The shelves filled with donated books, novels, poetry, cookbooks, even children's tales. Each evening, the residents gathered there, sharing not just stories from the pages, but stories from their lives. June told us of her days as a nurse, the patients she had cared for when no one else would. Another man, Miguel, told of working in the fields, his back bent under the sun, his pride in sending his children to school. Each story was like a thread, weaving us closer together. And me? For the first time in years, I told my story too. Not in whispers, not in shame, but aloud with pride. I spoke of the shop, of the bread, of the sacrifices. And when I finished, the room didn't fall silent in judgment. It erupted in applause. They saw me. Really saw me. The day of the celebration came not long after. Victor stood beside me at the gate as a bronze plaque was unveiled. The words gleamed in the sunlight. "If they ever told you you don't belong, this door is always open." I traced the letters with my fingers, my eyes burning with tears. Those words were more than a plaque. They were a promise, a vow to every soul who had ever been erased. The residents gathered, clapping softly. And then Lucas, my sweet boy, climbed onto a chair. He stood tall, his little chest rising as though he carried the voice of everyone there. "If you don't have a grandma," he announced proudly, "she can be mine too." The crowd erupted in applause. June wiped tears from her eyes. Miguel laughed, shaking his head. Even Victor smiled, his eyes glistening, and me? I cried too, but not from sadness, from joy. From the overwhelming truth that after years of silence, I had finally found my voice again, and it had been multiplied by every soul in that house. The applause echoed through the halls, bouncing off walls that had once held coldness but now radiated warmth. As the celebration wound down, Lucas ran to me, his arms wrapping tightly around my waist. I placed my hand on his shoulder, holding him close. My heart so full I thought it might burst. I looked around the room, the elders smiling, the children playing, the walls alive with life and love, and I realized I was no longer invisible. I wasn't just Lucas's grandmother anymore. I was everyone's grandmother. And in that truth, my legacy was sealed. And so, the woman they once called a guest became the heart of a new family. The house that once held betrayal now holds laughter, stories, and dignity. Isabella's story reminds us of something harsh, but true. Sometimes the blood that runs through your veins is not your family. Sometimes strangers who sit at your table become the real ones who carry your legacy. She was erased, humiliated, and abandoned. But in the end, she rose. Not with anger, but with love. Love that built a home for the forgotten. Love that turned pain into power. Love that made her everyone's grandmother. And maybe that's the lesson for us all. No matter how hard they try to silence you, your voice, your dignity, your story can never be erased. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, even in betrayal, there is always a chance to rebuild. Because legacy is not what you leave behind. Legacy is who you lift up.